He leaned against the kitchen counter with his arms crossed and looked at me with those dark eyes that always seemed to see too much and said, "You know what? I noticed about you today, the way you bite your lower lip when you're thinking about something. You did it 3 times while you were reading that book on the porch." And I froze with the coffee cup halfway to my mouth because nobody had ever paid attention to me like that. Nobody had ever watched me closely enough to notice something so small, so unconscious, so completely ordinary. And I felt my face go hot, felt my breath catch, felt something inside me that had been dormant for years suddenly flicker to life. And I said, "You shouldn't be noticing things like that." And he said, "Why not? Why shouldn't I notice the things that make you who you are, the small things, the real things?" And I didn't have an answer, couldn't find words, could only stand there in my own kitchen, feeling exposed and seen and terrified and exhilarated all at once. And I knew in that moment that everything was about to change, that I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't control, something I wasn't sure I wanted to control, something that scared me more than anything had scared me in years. If you're watching this from somewhere in the world right now, leave a comment telling me where you are, because I need to know I'm not alone in this. I need to know someone out there understands what it feels like when your entire sense of yourself gets turned upside down by someone you never expected, someone you never should have let get close, someone who somehow saw through all the walls you built and found the person you'd been hiding underneath. My name is Catherine. I'm 51 years old, and 6 months ago I thought I had my life figured out, thought I knew exactly who I was and what I wanted and what I was capable of feeling, thought the part of me that could feel desire and attraction and that electric pull toward another person had died somewhere along the way, died in my marriage maybe, or died when my husband left, or died in the years after when I learned to be alone, learned to be invisible, learned to accept that women my age don't get looked at anymore, don't get noticed, don't get to feel the kind of attention that makes your skin tingle and your heart race and your whole body come alive. But I was wrong about all of it, wrong about who I was, wrong about what I was capable of feeling, wrong about everything. And it all started the day my daughter brought home her study partner from college, and he looked at me like I was the most fascinating person in the room. Let me back up. Let me tell you how I got here. How I ended up standing in my kitchen at 51 years old trying to explain to a 23-year-old man why he shouldn't be noticing the way I bite my lip when I'm thinking. My marriage ended 4 years ago after 26 years, ended not with a dramatic explosion but with a quiet fizzle, ended when my husband sat me down one morning and said he didn't think we were in love anymore, said we'd grown apart, said he wanted different things, said all the words people say when they're trying to be kind about the fact that they're leaving, that they've stopped choosing you, that you've become wallpaper in your own life, background noise, something familiar and comforting, maybe but not exciting, not interesting, not worth staying for. He moved out 6 weeks later, moved in with a woman from his office. Nobody, younger or prettier or thinner, just someone different, someone new, someone who wasn't me. And I was left in the house we'd bought together 20 years earlier, the house where we'd raised our daughter Emma, the house that was supposed to be full of memories and love and all the things you build over decades together, but that, instead, felt like a museum of a life that no longer existed. Rooms full of furniture and photographs and the ghost of who I used to be. The divorce was amicable, that's what everyone said. Said we handled it so maturely, so respectfully, said we were both being so reasonable, but I wasn't being reasonable, I was being numb, was moving through the process like a zombie, signing papers, dividing assets, agreeing to everything because I didn't have the energy to fight, didn't have the will to care, didn't have any sense of what I even wanted anymore beyond just surviving each day. Emma was 19 when it happened, away at college, and she came home for a weekend and sat with me and cried and asked why, asked what had happened, asked if there was someone else, asked all the questions I'd asked myself, and I told her the truth, which was that sometimes people just fall out of love, sometimes there's no villain, no betrayal, no dramatic reason. Sometimes you just wake up one day and realize you're living with a stranger, someone you used to know, someone you used to love, someone who doesn't really see you anymore, and I watched her try to understand, try to process, try to make sense of it, and I realized she was grieving not just the loss of her parents' marriage, but the loss of the story she'd believed about love, about commitment, about forever, and I felt guilty for that. Guilty for breaking her illusion, guilty for not being able to hold it together, guilty for being the example of how love fails. After the divorce, I went through all the stages people go through, the crying, the anger, the bargaining with the universe, the desperate attempts to understand what I could have done differently, what I should have seen, how I could have prevented it, and then eventually the acceptance. The slow, painful acceptance that it was over, that I was alone, that I was 51 years old and starting over in a way I never imagined I'd have to start over, and I did what everyone tells you to do. I threw myself into work, into hobbies, into self-improvement. I started going to yoga classes and book clubs and cooking classes. I started traveling with friends. I started doing all the things that divorced women are supposed to do to rebuild their lives, to rediscover themselves, to prove they're fine, they're thriving, they're better off. And some of it helped. Some of it made me feel less lonely, less invisible, less like I was just waiting to die. But none of it made me feel alive. None of it made me feel like myself. None of it filled the hole that had opened up inside me when my husband walked away. And then 6 months ago, Emma called and asked if her study partner could stay with us for a few weeks, said his housing situation had fallen through, said he needed a place to crash while he figured things out, said it would really help her out because they were working on a big project together and it would be easier if they could work at home. And I said, of course, I had plenty of space. I was happy to help. I liked having Emma home, even if it was just for a short time, liked the noise and the energy and the feeling that the house was being used for something beyond just me rattling around in it alone. His name was Daniel, she told me. He was 23, he was in her computer science program, he was brilliant, but also kind, also funny, also someone she trusted. And I pictured some awkward nerdy kid, someone I'd barely notice, someone who'd spend all his time in front of a laptop, someone who'd be polite and quiet and completely forgettable. And I was fine with that, fine with having another body in the house, another presence, another reason to cook dinner and make conversation and pretend I was okay. The day Emma brought him home, I was in the kitchen making iced tea. It was late May, warm and sunny, and I heard the front door open, heard voices, heard Emma say, "Mom, we're here." And I walked into the hallway, and there he was, standing next to my daughter with a backpack over his shoulder and a box in his arms, and I felt something shift. In my chest, felt something I hadn't felt in so long I'd forgotten. What it was, because he wasn't what I expected, wasn't the awkward kid I'd pictured. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, with dark hair and darker eyes, and this quiet confidence, this way of standing in a space like he belonged there. And when he smiled at me and said, "Mrs. Brennan, thank you so much for letting me stay. I really appreciate it." His voice was deep and warm, and I felt it in my stomach, felt it in my hands, felt it everywhere, and I said, "Of course, you're welcome. Call me Catherine." And he said, "Okay, Catherine." And hearing my name in his voice made something inside me come alive, made me suddenly aware of my body in a way I hadn't been aware of it in years. That first week he was almost invisible, spent most of his time in the guest room working, came out for meals and was polite and helpful, and then disappeared again. And I told myself that was good. That was what I wanted. Someone who wouldn't be in the way, someone who wouldn't disrupt my routine, someone I could ignore. But I found I couldn't ignore him, found myself listening for his footsteps, found myself aware of when he was in the kitchen or the living room, found myself paying attention to the sound of his voice when he talked to Emma, found myself looking at him when I thought he wasn't looking, and I hated myself for it. Hated that I was even noticing him, hated that I was attracted to someone young enough to be my son, someone who was my daughter's friend, someone who was off limits in every possible way, and I tried to push it down, tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself it was nothing, just a harmless physical attraction that meant nothing, that would go away if I just gave it time. But it didn't go away. It got stronger, got more intense, and I started noticing things about him that I had no business noticing. The way he'd run his hand through his hair when he was thinking. The way he'd lean against the counter. When he was listening to Emma talk about their project, the way he'd laugh. This real laugh that seemed to come from somewhere deep. The way his hands moved when he was explaining something technical. The way he dressed, casual. But put together, the way he smelled. Clean and masculine and something I couldn't quite name. And I felt like a fool. Felt like a desperate middle-aged woman who was so starved for attention that she was projecting meaning onto someone. Who was just being a polite houseguest. Someone who probably didn't even see me as a person. Probably just saw me. As Emma's mom, as the woman who let him stay in her house, as someone old and invisible and completely irrelevant. But then things started to shift, started to change in ways I couldn't ignore. Couldn't explain away. Started when he began finding excuses to be in the same room as me, would come into the kitchen when I was making dinner, and offer to help, would sit in the living room when I was reading and ask what I was reading, would start conversations about things that had nothing to do with Emma or school, would ask me questions about my life, my work, my interests, my thoughts on things, and he'd listen, really listen. Not the way people usually listen where they're just waiting for their turn to talk, but the way someone listens when they actually care about the answer, when they actually want to know. And I found myself telling him things I didn't tell anyone, found myself opening up in ways I hadn't opened. Up since the divorce, found myself laughing at his jokes, found myself looking forward to the moments when Emma wasn't around, and it was just the two of us, and I knew I was in trouble, knew I was letting something happen, that I should be stopping, but I couldn't stop it. Didn't want to stop it. Wanted to see where it was going, even though I knew it was dangerous. The first time he said something that made it clear he was seeing me, really. Seeing me, not as Emma's mom, but as a woman, as Catherine was about. 3 weeks after he moved in, we were in the kitchen. Emma had gone to bed. I was cleaning up after dinner, and he was helping dry dishes. And he said, "You know what I noticed about you?" And I said, "What?" Trying to sound casual, and he said, "You're always the last person to eat. You serve everyone else first. Make sure everyone has what they need. And only then do you sit down." And I said, "I guess that's just habit. I've been doing it for so long I don't even think about it." And he said, "It's not just habit. It's who you are. You take care of people. Put them first." And I wonder when the last time was that someone took care of you, and I felt tears start. Couldn't help it. Because nobody had said anything like that to me in so long. Nobody had noticed. Nobody had cared. And I said, "I'm fine. I don't need anyone to take care of me." And he said, "Everyone needs someone to take care of them sometimes, even the people who spend their whole lives taking care of everyone else." I didn't know what to say, couldn't find words, just stood there with tears running down my face, feeling exposed and vulnerable, and seen in a way that terrified me. And he said, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you." And I said, "You didn't upset me, you just..." Nobody said anything like that to me in a very long time. And he said, "That's a shame. Someone should be saying things like that to you every day, should be noticing all the things you do, all the ways you make life better for the people around you." And I said, "You're very kind, but you don't really know me. You've only been here a few weeks." And he said, "Maybe, but I pay attention. I notice things. I notice the way you hum when you're cooking, the way you always make sure there's fresh coffee in the morning even, though you don't drink it until later, the way you leave books lying around like you're creating little escape routes in every room, the way you bite your lip when you're thinking, and the fact that nobody's been noticing these things about you is criminal." That was the moment. That was when I knew this wasn't just me projecting, wasn't just me being lonely and vulnerable. This was him actually seeing me, actually paying attention, actually finding me interesting enough to watch, to notice, to remember, and I didn't know what to do with that. Didn't know how to process it. Didn't know if I should shut it down or let it happen. And I stood there in my kitchen with this young man who was looking at me with an intensity that made my whole body feel like it was on fire. And I said, "Daniel, I don't think you realize what you're saying. I'm 51 years old. I'm your friend's mother. I'm not someone you should be noticing in that way." And he said, "In what way?" All I said was that I noticed things About you, is there something wrong with that? And I said, no, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just, I paused, trying to find the right words. It's just that when you talk about noticing things about me, it feels like something. More than casual observation, it feels like something I shouldn't be feeling. And he said, what are you feeling? And I said, I don't know, confused, scared. Like I'm standing on the edge of something I can't come back from. He stepped closer, not touching me, but close enough that I could feel the heat coming off his body, could smell whatever soap or cologne he was wearing, and he said, Catherine, I need you to know that I'm not confused. I know exactly what I'm feeling. I'm attracted to you. I think about you constantly. I find excuses to be near you. I pay attention to the smallest things about you because everything about you fascinates me. And I know there's an age difference. I know this is complicated. I know all the reasons why this doesn't make sense. But I don't care. I care about how I feel when I'm around you, which is more alive than I've felt in my entire life. And I need to know if you feel anything, if there's any chance you might feel the same way, because if there's not, then tell me now and I'll stop. I'll go back to being just Emma's friend, just someone staying in your guest room. But if there is, if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, then we need to talk about it. I stood there unable to speak, unable to move, unable to do anything except feel. Feel the fear and the desire and the confusion and the terror of being seen this way, of being wanted this way, of having someone half my age tell me he thought about me constantly. And I wanted to tell him no, wanted to tell him this was impossible, wanted to protect both of us from the disaster this would inevitably become. But I couldn't lie, couldn't pretend, couldn't deny that I felt it too, felt this pull toward him, felt this hunger I'd convinced myself was dead, felt this need to be close to him, to let him know me, and I said, yes, I feel it, God help me, I feel it. But that doesn't mean we should do anything about it. That doesn't mean this is a good idea. And he said, why not? Why can't we at least explore it, see where it goes? And I said, because you're 23, and I'm 51, and Emma would never forgive me and people would judge, and you'd eventually realize I'm too old, too boring, too damaged. And he said, I don't care about any of that. I care about you, about this, about what happens when we're in the same room. And I can't stop looking at you, and you can. Stop looking at me. That's real. That matters. Everything else is just noise. We stood there for a long moment, the air between us thick with everything unsaid. Everything we both wanted but were too scared to reach for. And then Emma called from upstairs asking if we'd seen her charger, and the spell broke. And we stepped apart, and I said, we can't do this. We can't let this happen. And he said, okay, I understand. And he left the kitchen, and I stood there alone, trying to catch my breath, trying to calm my racing heart, trying to understand what had just happened and what it meant and how I was supposed to go back to normal when normal had just been completely destroyed. For the next few days, we avoided each other, or tried to. I'd leave a room when he entered. He'd find excuses to be out of the house, and Emma noticed, asked if something had happened, asked if Daniel had done something to upset me. And I said, no. Everything's fine. I'm just busy with work. But she didn't believe me. I could tell, could see her watching us, trying to figure out what had shifted, and I knew we couldn't keep this up. Knew we needed to talk, needed to figure out what we were going to do, but I was too scared, too afraid of what would happen if we actually addressed it, too afraid of wanting something I couldn't have, something I shouldn't want. Then one night, I couldn't sleep, went downstairs around 2 a.m. to make tea, and found him in the kitchen, sitting at the table in the dark, and he said couldn't sleep either. And I said, no, too much on my mind. And he said, me too. And we sat there in the darkness, just the two of us. And he said, Catherine, we need to talk about this. We can't keep avoiding each other. It's making everything weird. And I said, I know. I just don't know what to say, don't know how to make this make sense. And he said, it doesn't have to make sense. It just has to be honest. And honestly, I can't stop thinking about you, can't stop wanting to be near you, can't stop noticing every little thing about you. And I said, you keep saying that, keep talking about noticing things, what things? And he said, everything. The way you wrap your hands around your coffee cup like you're trying to absorb the warmth. The way you read with your legs tucked under you. The way you laugh at jokes that aren't even funny just to make people feel good. The way you move through the house like you're trying to take up as little space as possible, like you're apologizing for existing, and I want to know why. Want to know who made you feel like you had to be invisible. I felt tears start again. Felt that familiar ache in my chest that came whenever someone got too close to the truth, and I said my husband, my ex-husband, he made me feel invisible. Made me feel like I was just background noise in my own life. And when he left, I thought maybe I could reclaim myself, could figure out who I was without him, but instead, I just became more invisible, just faded more into the background, and I convinced myself that was okay. Convinced myself that's what happens when you get older. You become less relevant, less interesting, less worth noticing, and he said that's bullshit. Age doesn't make you invisible. You're not invisible. You're the most visible thing in any room you're in, at least to me, and I said, you're just saying that. You're young. You don't understand what it's like to be written off, to have people look through you instead of at you, to know that you're past the age where anyone finds you desirable. And he said, I'm not just saying it, I mean it, and I'm not that young. I'm 23. I know what I want, I know what I feel, and what I feel when I look at you is desire, is fascination, is this overwhelming need to know everything about you. And age doesn't change that, doesn't diminish it, doesn't make it less real. We sat there in the dark kitchen, the only light coming from the moon through the window, and I could barely see his face, but I could feel his presence, could feel the weight of everything he was saying, everything he was offering. And I said, even if I believed you, even if I believed this was real, what are we supposed to do about it? We can't tell Emma. We can't let this actually happen. There are too many ways this could go wrong, and he said, or it could go right. Have you thought about that? What if this is exactly what we both need? What if we're supposed to find each other right now in this moment? What if trying to deny it is more dangerous than giving it a chance? And I said, you make it sound so simple. And he said, maybe it is that simple. Maybe we're the ones making it complicated. And I said, nothing about this is simple. You're my daughter's friend. You're living in my house. You're half my age. If we do this and it goes wrong, everything explodes. Everything gets destroyed. And he said, and if we don't do it and spend the rest of our lives wondering what might have been, isn't that its own kind of destruction? He was right. I knew he was right. Knew that living with this want, this need, this constant awareness of him and what we could be, knew that would destroy me slowly, would eat away at me until there was nothing left. And I realized that I had a choice. Could keep hiding, keep protecting myself, keep being invisible, or I could take the risk, could let myself be seen, could let myself want something even if it scared me, even if it might hurt me, even if everyone would judge. And I looked at him sitting across from me in the darkness, and I said, okay, let's try, let's see what this is, but we have to be careful, have to keep it quiet. Can't let Emma know, at least not yet. And he said, I can do careful, I can do quiet, as long as I get to be close to you, as long as I get to know you the way I want to know you. And I said, what does that mean? How do you want to know me? And he said, every way. I want to know what makes you happy, what makes you sad, what you dream about, what you're afraid of. I want to know your favorite book and your worst memory and what you look like first thing in the morning. I want to know everything. And so it started, this secret thing between us, this relationship that existed in the spaces between normal life, in the late night conversations in the kitchen, in the stolen glances when Emma wasn't looking, in the accidental touches that weren't really accidents. His hand brushing mine when we reached for the same thing, his shoulder pressing against mine when we stood at the counter. These small moments that felt huge, that felt like everything, and I felt myself opening up, felt myself coming alive in ways I'd forgotten I could feel, felt desire and excitement and fear and joy all tangled together, and he kept noticing. things, kept telling me about them, would say, I love the way you tilt your head when you're listening to music, would say. I love how you always smell like lavender, would say I love that you dog-ear pages in books even though you have bookmarks, and each observation felt like a gift, felt like proof that I existed, that I mattered, that I was worth paying attention to. We'd stay up until 3, 4 in the morning just talking, sitting at the kitchen table or on the couch in the living room, keeping our voices low so Emma wouldn't hear, and he'd tell me about his life, his childhood, his dreams, his fears, and I'd tell him mine, tell him things I'd never told anyone. And I'd watch his face as he listened, watch the way his eyes never left mine, watch the way. He seemed to absorb every word like it mattered, like I mattered. And I'd think, how is this real? How is this actually happening? How does someone like him see something in someone like me? But he'd answer before I could even ask, would say, you're amazing, you're fascinating, you're everything. And I'd want to believe him, would let myself believe him in those moments, would let myself be seen. One night, about 6 weeks after that first conversation in the kitchen, Emma had gone to stay at a friend's place to work on part of their project, and Daniel and I were alone in the house, and there was this tension, this awareness that we were finally, truly alone, no risk of being interrupted, no need to keep our voices down, no need to hide, and we were sitting on the couch. Not touching but close, watching some movie neither of us was paying attention to, and he said, Catherine, can I ask you something? And I said, of course. And he said, do you ever think about what it would be like if we didn't have to hide, if we could just be together without worrying about what Emma would think or what anyone would say? And I said, all the time, I think about it constantly, but I don't know if that's possible, don't know if we can ever get there. And he said, what if we could? What if we told her, what if we just dealt with whatever consequences came and trusted that if this is real, then it's worth fighting for? I said, I'm not ready for that. Not ready to risk losing her, not ready to deal with her anger or her hurt or her judgment. And he said, okay, I understand. We'll wait. We'll take this at whatever pace you need, but I need you to know that I'm serious about this, serious about you. This isn't a phase or an experiment or something. I'm going to wake up from, you're not a curiosity or a fantasy, you're real, and what I feel for you is real, and I want a future with you. Want to be able to take you out. Want to be able to hold your hand in public. Want to be able to tell people you're mine. And I said, I want that too. Want it more than I can tell you, but I'm so scared. Scared of what happens if this doesn't work. Scared of hurting you. Scared of being hurt. Scared of everything. And he said, I know, I'm scared too, but I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you. He reached over and took my hand, actually took my hand, and it was the first time we'd really touched beyond those accidental moments, the first time we deliberately, intentionally made contact, and I felt electricity run through me, felt my whole body respond, felt years of numbness and disconnection fall away, and I looked at our hands, his young and strong, mine older, marked by time, and I said, you should be with someone your own age, someone who can give you things I can't give you. And he said, like, what can they give me that you can't? And I said, a future without complications, children if you want them, a partner who isn't constantly worried about getting old, about being left again, about not being enough. And he said, you're already enough, more than enough, you're everything I didn't know I was looking for. And children, I don't know if I want them. Never really thought about it, but I know I want you, know I want this, know I want whatever life we can build together. We sat there holding hands, and then he said, can I kiss you? And I felt my heart stop, felt panic and desire crash together, and I said yes. And he leaned in slowly, giving me time to change my mind, time to pull away, but I didn't. I stayed, I waited, and when his lips touched mine, I felt everything shift, felt the world rearrange. Itself, felt myself become someone new, someone who was allowed to want this, to have this, to feel this, and we kissed for a long time, not rushing, just exploring, just being, and when we finally pulled apart, we were both breathing hard. And he said, I've wanted to do that for so long, and I said, me too. And he said, what do we do now? And I said, I don't know, but I know I can't go back. Can't pretend this didn't happen, can't pretend I don't feel this way. And he said, good, because I'm not going anywhere, I'm staying. I'm here. I'm yours if you'll have me. And so here I am, 6 months later, still navigating this impossible, beautiful, terrifying thing with Daniel, still keeping it secret from Emma, still figuring out what this means and where it's going, still feeling like I'm living two lives. The visible one where I'm just Catherine, Emma's mom, middle-aged and unremarkable, and the invisible one where I'm Catherine, Daniel's partner, his love, his person, the one he notices, the one he sees, the one he wants. And I don't know how long we can keep both lives separate. Don't know when we'll have to tell Emma. Don't know if this can survive being exposed to the world. But I know I'm happier than I've been in years. Know I feel more alive, more myself, more real than I've ever felt. And I know it's because of him, because of the way he sees me, the way he notices the smallest things, the way he makes me feel like I matter, like I'm worth wanting, worth choosing, worth loving. And whether this lasts forever or falls apart tomorrow, at least I'll know I had this feeling, had this moment of being truly seen, truly desired, truly alive. And that has to be worth something, has to mean something, has to count for something in this strange, complicated, beautiful life I'm living.